I'm Gabriel Noronha. When I was at the State Department during the Aban protests, I was the Director of Communications and also the lead for the Iran Action Group on Human Rights and Democracy. And I was in charge of the Dar Farsi platform, really communicating to Iranians what the United States was about, what we were trying to do, and the message we were trying to send to the Iranian people, that we were with them and stood with them in their quest for a better country, 100%. So I was actually in Romania on the way back from an international conference on ballistic missiles, and I remember right before we got on the plane, I checked my phone, and there were the first videos trickling out from Iran of sort of small scale protests. And by the time I landed in my connection flight, it seemed that they were popping up all over the country. And when I got back to Washington about almost a day later, it had completely ballooned across the country. It was in maybe 40, 50 cities at the time, and it was eventually going to spread to 1 to 200 cities. Absolutely, and I think I hadn't been there for some of the protests in 2018, but what I saw was a complete sea change. And my first thought was I was incredibly proud of the protesters who were risking a lot to stand up for their rights and look for a better country. And that's a really difficult thing in a place like Iran, where you know that if you do that, you could be paying for that with your life, which ultimately so many of them did. And so I was proud of them, but also a little fearful for their safety, and unsure what was going to happen next. Really just disgust and anger, and it was really the true face of the Islamic Republic showing itself to the world. Um, and it was what we had tried so long to tell the world about the threat from the Iranian regime, and a lot of people didn't believe it or sort of underplayed it. And there it was on camera, for no one could hide it. It was snipers taking out children in many cases, taking out innocent civilians left and right. And the video you alluded to, this is the one that stuck with me the most, was the video of pickup trucks surrounding the marsh in Marshar and just spraying the crowd with machine gun fire. That is a video that sort of is imprinted in my mind and always will be. One of our first priorities was trying to document as much as we could, and so we were looking throughout the internet, trying to find documentation of where these protests were, where they were changing. And then we saw the Iranian regime sort of strike back first on the digital front and envelop the country into this digital darkness, and cutting off the Iranians from the internet. And it was really our first sign that things were about to get really bad for the protesters. Anytime that you're shielding the world from your own country, it's typically because you're about to do something really terrible and brutal to your own people. And ultimately, that's what happened. Our first instinct was to make sure that we didn't repeat the mistakes of the Obama administration in 2009 with the Green Movement. And so we were very clear from the outset, from Secretary Pompeo, from President Trump, that we stood with the Iranian people. We stood with them, we supported them, and we heard their calls for change, and were with them 100%. The next thing that we were trying to do was restore the internet. And the United States spends over $100 million every year on internet freedom programs. And some of those were actually very helpful in providing about 10,000 Iranians with the ability to access the internet. And that's how a lot of the videos and clips actually were able to escape from Iran during the censorship, the extreme censorship period. And so we were trying to figure out how can we best support these tools, make them even more powerful, and ultimately try to restore internet access to the whole country of Iran. We shortly after the protests took place, we created a channel for the Iranian people to send their videos, their stories, their pictures to us, so that we could share them with the world. If the Iranian government was going to censor them, we would show that for ourselves. And so, in the 2 weeks after the protests, we received 32,000 tips, stories, videos, text messages from Iranians sharing their stories. And I read through almost every single one of those, and I watched all the videos. And so to the Iranian people, I do want to say, we hear you, and we always see you. We will always stand with you until you have a government that represents your desires. We need to be prepared across the board. The first tool that you're going to talk about is making sure we know that as soon as Iran tries to take down the internet, the United States can support internet and communication tools for the Iranian people so that they can talk amongst themselves and share coordination with themselves and with the rest of the world and show them what's happening. The next thing is we really need to have a game plan for what to do to stop the Iranian regime from killing their own people. Sanctions is the most important way to do that. You can only fund the Basij and the Artesh and the IRGC who are going to kill Iranians if they have the money to do so. And so one of the most important things that sanctions do is that it deprives the regime of the revenue it needs to fund its brute squads that are ultimately going to come and kill Iranians. But there's also a lot of things behind the scenes that the United States should be planning for a protest like this. It shouldn't be the case that you're sort of looking at it and saying, no, what do we do? You should have sort of a handbook and say, this is the plan that we will have if the Iranian people are going to risk their lives and in many cases lose their lives for the sake of their country and their democracy. It's only fair for the United States to stand with them and be prepared to help them in their quest. This is not the United States doing the regime changes, as some people like to say it. This is the Iranian people saying, we despise this regime, we have no interest in it, and we do not want it. And it is simply the United States saying, we support you in your desire for a different country and a different government. We have never forgotten you. We have never forgotten your loved ones who were killed by this regime, and we will never stop seeking justice for them. We tried to come through as much evidence as we could, and we sanctioned some of the generals who were responsible for killing your loved ones. We sanctioned judges who were involved in hanging prisoners, and we sanctioned the prisons where so many Iranians have been tortured and continue to be tortured today. We will continue to try to always remember the victims of Aban, and we will always remember that we need to pursue justice for those that caused so much pain and suffering for the Iranian people.